Hey, Kevin here, Skylabs. We're doing another video. This one's been needed for a while. We get a lot of customers that come in, they're buying their first stereo. They're not really sure what they need. There's a lot of terms that they're not familiar with, and we thought we'd do a video just to show people that might be getting into this hobby. A couple things to look out for, maybe some things you want to think about before you go and purchase your stereo, and then we're going to give you some terms and stuff like that so you don't look like a deer in headlights when the person that's selling you something starts rattling off a few terms. So, hey, if you're buying a stereo, this video is for you. Stick around. Okay, so before we get started, I want to let everybody know, this first part of the video, we're just going to be talking about terms that you might not be familiar with, like balance, mono. And so if you're already familiar with those kind of things, jump to the second half. For the people that don't know what a balance knob is, start here at the beginning and we'll work our way through it. So let's do this. Oh, one other thing. Most important thing about this whole thing. Don't ever let anybody tell you that something you think sounds good doesn't. Everybody's got their own different tastes and everybody's got their own opinions, especially in the audio world. So if something sounds good to you, don't let anybody talk you out of it. Be grateful you got something you like the sound of, because a lot of people chase their tails and spend a lot of money trying to find something that maybe even doesn't even exist. So, if you got a system that you love, hey, you're doing better than most of the people out there. So just keep that in mind. Nothing to take too seriously. It's just stereo equipment. So here we go. All right. So for all the newbies out there, if you go to a stereo shop or even Best Buy, it doesn't matter, and you're checking out, maybe wanting to buy a stereo, you're going to hear things like amplifier and preamplifier and phono preamp and things like that, that you really kind of need to know what you're talking about a little bit, just because you don't want to buy something you don't need. I think that happens quite a bit because people just don't know. And, how would you know unless you do a little bit of research? So hopefully this helps you out. Let's start with stereo terms, and the first one would be amplifier, and that really, that's what you get your power from. It's the amplifier. It's what feeds power to the speakers, and this is measured in watts. So when somebody says this amplifier is 100 watts, they're referring to how much power that particular unit has to drive your speakers. Second, preamplifier. This would be another amplification stage that takes your source, as in CD, phono, tablet, whatever, and boosts that signal up so it's at a good enough level for the amplifier to put the last stage of power to it and give it to the speakers. So you have a preamplifier and then you have an amplifier. Phono preamp. Okay, so people confuse the phono preamp with the preamp. Phono is different than auxiliary, tape, CD, and that it needs another buffer stage. So a phono preamp takes the signal from the turntable, bumps it up a level, gives it to the preamplifier, that bumps it up another level to feed it to the amplifier. And I don't want to get too much into detail, but if you just look at it that way, I think that at least gets you going. So the reason why some people say, well, you need a phono preamp, it's because your current stereo or a stereo that doesn't have a phono preamp in it needs that additional stage of boost or amplification. So, and then another term you're going to hear would be integrated amplifier. And if somebody refers to something as an integrated amplifier, what they're saying is you have one box with an amplifier and a preamplifier built in. So rather than having a standalone amplifier and a standalone preamplifier, they're both combined into one. Yep, amplifier, preamplifier, integrated amplifier, all together. A tuner. A tuner is something that tunes in FM or AM broadcasts. So you can have a standalone tuner that you would just use to pull in your local AM, FM frequencies. Pretty much as simple as that. If they say tuner, they're talking about an AM, FM tuner. A receiver is kind of all three combined. So you've got your amplifier, you've got your preamplifier, and you've got your tuner all in one unit, and that becomes a receiver. I don't know a better way to explain it. Sure, if somebody else does, leave it in the comments. But pretty much when you're buying a receiver, you're buying the amplifier, preamplifier, tuner, and you get one nice package. Whereas if you were buying separates, you were buying an amplifier, a preamplifier, and a tuner. And let's just leave it at that. Okay, so next we go to speakers. And you're gonna hear these terms, like a tweeter. A tweeter it produces the high frequencies. It's generally the smaller speaker in the cabinet. Each cabinet has usually several drivers. And we're using broad strokes here. I don't want to talk about, I don't want to get into too many specifics. This is for entry-level newbies here. Tweeters produces the high frequencies, cymbal crashes, sibilance from voices, your details, stuff like that. Then there's a mid-range sometimes, and the mid-range, that's kind of the body of the music. That's piano, the vocals, guitars. A lot of these are the mid-range of the music, and those are usually reproduced by a mid-range speaker. And then the last would be a woofer, and that's producing all your low frequencies like, bass guitar, kick drum, some keyboards if they're playing the lower registers of the keys, that type of thing. So really, for the most part, let's say you have your 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, which is the human frequency, what you can hear, covered by 3 different speakers for the most part. Sometimes 2 speakers cover that, and that's called a two-way speaker system. Other times, and what I was referring to was a 3-way speaker system. So 3 different speakers to produce the frequency spectrum that humans can hear, or a 2-way speaker system using 2 speakers to produce 20 to 20 kilohertz. So that should be good enough. If I'm assuming if this is your first stereo, you're not going kind of bonkers and spending a ton of money. Buy a set of speakers that sounds good to you. It doesn't matter if it's a 2-way or 3-way system. This is your first stereo. You have plenty of time to hear different things or try different things down the road. So don't get hung up on that too much. Now with speakers, a lot of people come in and they say, well, I'm looking for a set of speakers to match my receiver. And watt-wise, so I've got, let's say they'll come in and they say, I've got a 150 watt per channel amplifier, and I'm looking for a 150 watt set of speakers. And don't worry about that. The way they rate speakers is that's the most power they can handle. Most people, and this is broad stroke again, probably use 15 to 30 watts of amplification for normal listening levels. You don't need 150 watts. You don't need speakers that are rated to 300 watts. You don't need to match your wattage to your amplifier. We'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get crazy on that subject either, because that can get pretty nutty. So, okay, the last group of terms I think we need to talk about is related to turntables, and that would be the stylus or the needle. And if you can avoid saying needle, you'll avoid the person that is selling you something cringing. Needles were what they used on the Edison, cranking. We're far beyond that. They're styluses. I won't give you shit if you come into my store and you say needle. People do it all the time, and it's okay. Nobody's gonna act like high fidelity and make fun of you and kick you out of the store. So anyway, just if you can avoid it, it's better to start with the word stylus. And this is the piece of metal, and it's actually, ruby, sapphire, diamond tip that it rides the groove of the record. That's what causes the vibration and reproduces the sound. So that is the stylus. The cartridge, which is what holds the stylus, is where those vibrations are turned into audio information that you and I can hear. So there's the body of the cartridge, there's the stylus. And then the plinth is the base of the turntable, or the body of the turntable. But you might hear somebody say, it's got a wood plinth. And you know they're referring to the base of the turntable. And then a platter. The platter is the actual platter that sits on the base or the plinth that you put the record on that spins the record. So I think, if you understand stylus, cartridge, plinth, platter, you've got turntable pretty good. We have a video on whether or not, direct drive or belt drive is better for you. There'll be a link down in the description. If you are purchasing a turntable, maybe give that a watch to see if there's something in there that helps you out. All right, so controls. And you're going to see these controls on, they're the same. In the 70s, you'll see a few more knobs and switches that they kind of got away from today. So this will kind of depend on whether you are purchasing a vintage piece of equipment or a modern piece of equipment. But for the most part, you're going to see stuff like bass, mid-range, or treble, and those are the controls for the bass, mid-range, and treble. So you can attenuate or boost whichever group of frequencies to your liking. Loudness is another one. Talk about a controversial word on the internet too. The audiophiles do not like the loudness button, but I like it. I use it a lot of times. Loudness, what it does is it boosts the bass and the treble. And this has to do with the way that the human ear perceives music at lower levels. And we'll leave it at that. Balance, this would be your left and right stereo imaging. If you are maybe sitting closer to the left speaker than you are the right speaker, and you would like to balance those two speakers from your ears without moving position, you can favor one speaker or the other with the balance knob. Pretty simple. And then mono stereo. You don't see this in newer electronics for the most part, but the older equipment did this, and mono just combined the information that the left and right channels have into and brought them together. I don't want to get too far into that. Stereo separates the channels out and gives you the information that the engineer wanted you to hear in the right speaker and the information that they wanted you to hear in the left speaker. And that's about as straightforward as I can be with. So, all right, this is the part where I give you my opinion on things that I look for or I think about before I start assembling a stereo system. And these are really important. I think if you put a little bit of thought into this information here, it will save you a lot of buying and selling of things to try and achieve what you have in your head or what goals you have in your head. So, number one, the question to ask yourself is, what's your goal with sound? What kinds of music do you listen to? Is it casual listening or critical listening? Are you looking for high SPLs or high levels? And this is really important because certain speakers can cater to what you're going for better than others can. Just knowing what you're trying to achieve with those four groups, what kind of music you want to listen to. Is it casual listening, critical listening, or are you looking for high levels? If you go into where you're going to purchase your stereo and you tell them that, I think they can really kind of steer you to directions. If somebody were to come to me and say, I'm looking for a rock speaker, I want really high levels, and it's just casual listening, I'd probably say something like a Serwin Vega or Infinities or something super efficient, maybe a little bit of exaggerated bass, that type of thing, but that's just one example. And another thing would be, what do you want it to look like? And I know a lot of people will say, it's not about what it looks like, and they're full of shit. And I'll use my reference with food with this. If you go to a restaurant and you buy, a $100 plate of food and it looks like shit, unfortunately, it kind of tastes like shit. It's just the way it is. Our eyes, at least the way I am, my eyes have a pretty big opinion on things that shouldn't. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but yeah, you you are the one that has to look at the stereo equipment when you're sitting there listening to it, you know? So you want it to be something you find pleasant to look at, whether it's the speakers, the receiver, amplifier, or the turntable. So don't rule that out and think that it's not important, because it definitely is important, especially when you have multiple people sharing that space. You know, a lot of times we get couples that come in and you have to give or take, you know. Somebody might not like the look of something that you love the sound of, and now you're in a conundrum, but that's for you guys to work out, isn't it? Anyway, okay, Hugh, this is a big one. And if whoever you're purchasing this from should know this, and if they don't, then they should know better. But you want to buy the speakers for the room, and then you want to buy the amplifier for the speakers. So, you know, if you have a big room, you kind of need a big speaker. If you have a small room, you're probably going to want a smaller speaker that can breathe in that room. And that will dictate how much power and amplification you need. So you don't buy the amplifier first. And you just might narrow down which speakers you can buy. So buy the speakers for the room, buy the amplifier for the speakers. And then, you know, what sources are you planning on using? As in, you know, how many you CD player, you want to hook a, you know, Bluetooth receiver up to it, turntable, cassette deck, TV. That's going to dictate a lot of things too. You know, how many inputs do you need as far as the amplifier goes, or the receiver? You want to think about those things before you make that purchase, because you can add them, but now you're kind of going down a road of extra gizmos and gadgets and stuff. And if you can avoid it by making a better purchase, knowing how many inputs you need, you're going to be better off. That's just the way that works. So, let's see, what else do I got here? Oh, yeah, and one other thing with the sources, you know, the other thing would be, you know, do you need a subwoofer? You know, some amplifiers and receivers don't have subwoofer outputs. Do you need a remote control? Do you want a warranty? Is it something that needs to be repairable? Those are going to be things you want to think about as well when making that purchase of the amplifier and the receiver. Next one would be know your limits and try not to bottleneck. And this is huge. So I'm in a situation right now. Yes, my speakers are hooked up back here, and I listen to stuff while I'm kind of tinkering down here, but this is not my listening room. Right now, I don't even have a listening room. Our house is not set up, or it's just not set up for it. So while I have had the B&Ws upstairs in my living room, that room is terrible for them. They don't sound good there. Right now I've got a smaller pair of Polk bookshelves that sound better in that room, just because that's more what they're made for. These B&Ws need to be in a nicer room. That's just the basics of it. So putting those speakers in there it's overkill, and it's actually not as good as a cheaper smaller speaker. So that's why I have the Polks in there now. You know, room acoustics should make a huge part of your decision. You know, neighbors in an apartment, you know, do you live in an apartment? You probably don't want a subwoofer if you do. You know, you probably don't want big speakers if you do. You might even want to think about headphones, honestly. And then, you know, as far as like, I use this as a reference quite a bit. Back in the day when I used to install home theater and automation, I went over to this guy's house. We were working on his theater, and he had a bar area, and he said, hey, you know, when you get wrapped up here, do you mind coming down and taking a listen to this? And I went down into his basement, and he had this really nice stereo, you know, at least $6,000-$7,000 system for the two speakers, turntable and amplifier. And it was in a room with no carpet. It had a couple chairs. I think they were leather, not even cloth. There was nothing on the walls. It was tile floor, square, and it couldn't have been a worse acoustic environment. And he said, you know, he played me something, And, honestly, he didn't even need to. I knew exactly the problem before he even played it, because just talking in that room, the reflections in there were a nightmare. And there's no system that's going to sound good in there except for a set of headphones. And that's just the reality of it. Unless you can get a rug in there and, kind of, deaden the room a little bit. I mean, that room was so live, it was insane. And he didn't understand that, he spent all this money on his gear. Why does it sound so bad? Well, man, your room is it has a huge effect on your audio playback. Your room is, in a way, it's the other piece of equipment in the equation. So if you've got a bad room, don't spend a bunch of money on gear. If you've got a big 4-wall tile floor room with no acoustic absorption, don't buy an expensive stereo. You're just wasting your money. So anyway, think about that. And then, and this is probably the last thing, come up with a budget. And you want to, the rule of thumb, and it's been this way for a long time, is you want to spend like 2/3 of your budget on the speakers. The speakers have a bigger impact on the sound than the amplifier or the turntable do. You can sit there and A/B speakers, and every single one of them sounds different. There's not as big of differences in amplification and turntables, to a degree. Don't butcher me over that one. And the other thing is if you have an amazing set of speakers and you have a really shitty amplifier, it's going to sound pretty good. If you have really shitty set of speakers and an amazing amplifier, it's still going to sound like shit. And that is the truth of it, So put your money in your speakers. Get something that you're going to keep for a while. You can always upgrade the amplifier. You can always upgrade the turntable and everything. Put your money in the speakers. And hopefully that helps you not make a bad mistake on that. In summary, though, I don't know how many hundreds of pieces of equipment I've listened to over the years. And, that's really what got me into this business, honestly, was I kept on buying. I wanted to hear everything, So I would buy vintage equipment when I saw it cheap. I would, use it for a while and resell it. And most of the time, I either broke even or made a little bit of money on it and was able to, have it in my home for, 5-6 months. So that's one of the, that's an advantage to vintage equipment. I think if you get kind of the ballpark of what I just kind of went through, I think you're ready to go and talk to somebody about maybe purchasing a receiver, a set of speakers, and a turntable. If not, you can always send me a message, send me an email, leave a comment. There, I'm sure there are plenty of people that would be happy to answer any questions you got on any of that stuff. So,